The wine glass in my hand was a deep, dark red, and the room around me was all ivory tablecloths and candlelight, and the kind of laughter that costs money to perform. 40 guests filled my mother-in-law's dining room, which she'd had extended specifically for occasions like this, occasions where she could arrange the world the way she believed it should look. She stood at the head of the table in a cream blazer, her hair set in that precise silver wave she'd worn to every important moment of the last decade, and she was smiling the way she always smiled when she was about to do something that would hollow me out. She tapped her champagne flute with a small silver spoon. The room quieted. She said she had an announcement. She said that after watching her younger son struggle to get his business off the ground, she had decided to do what any loving mother would do. She reached into the leather portfolio on the table beside her and pulled out a document I recognized immediately because I had signed the original myself 3 years ago. She announced that she was transferring the licensing rights to my flagship cybersecurity software, the platform I had spent 4 years building from nothing, along with a 49% equity stake in my build company, to my brother-in-law, as a gift, to help him find his footing. The table erupted. My brother-in-law stood up and spread his arms wide. His girlfriend shrieked and grabbed his elbow. My husband, sitting 2 seats away from me, stared at his plate. He didn't look at me. He knew better than to look at me. I didn't stand. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw my wine. I sat completely still and watched my mother-in-law beam at the room while she handed a stranger 49% of the company I had bled for, the platform that was currently licensed to 11 Fortune 500 clients and generating $4.2 million in annual recurring revenue. She handed it over like it was a fruit basket. She didn't look at me once. Before I tell you how I dismantled the entire evening, without raising my voice above a conversational tone, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to know how far this reaches. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. On paper, I'm the wife of my mother-in-law's eldest son and the founder of a boutique cybersecurity firm called Verilog Solutions. Off paper, I've spent the last 2 years as a confidential technical consultant to the FTC's Division of Privacy and Identity Protection. I don't say that to impress anyone. I say it because it matters later. It matters a lot. I grew up with nothing particularly dramatic. No villain origin story, no generational trauma I needed to perform for sympathy. I was simply the woman my mother-in-law had decided was wrong for her son from the first dinner I attended at her home 7 years ago. I had come in a blazer and a firm handshake, and she had looked at me the way you look at a piece of furniture that doesn't match the room. She was cordial enough. She was always cordial enough. That was the weapon she used, cordiality as a blade, politeness as a slow bleed. Over the years, she had made it quietly, consistently clear that I was tolerated, not chosen, that my success was a happy accident, that my company was clever in the diminutive way people say clever when they mean small. She had introduced me at events as my husband's wife, not by my name. She had suggested, gently, that I might consider stepping back from work when we had children. She had never once asked a single question about what I actually built. My brother-in-law, on the other hand, was the family's permanent investment project. He was 34 and had launched 4 businesses in 6 years, a meal kit service, a fitness app, a boutique bourbon brand, a real estate wholesaling operation. Each one had burned through capital and collapsed within 18 months. Each collapse had been reframed at family dinners as a learning experience, as proof of his entrepreneurial spirit, as evidence that the market simply wasn't ready for his vision. No one asked the people he owed money to whether the market was ready. I knew his track record in detail not because I was nosy, but because 18 months ago I had run a standard background check the way I do on anyone my company might touch. He had approached me once, casually, at a 4th of July cookout, suggesting we partner. He said my platform could be the engine behind his next venture. He said it with the confidence of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered to him. I declined. He laughed it off. I forgot about it. I did not forget about what I found in the background check, but I'll get to that. For now, I want you to picture me at that table, perfectly still, while my mother-in-law explained the terms of a transfer she had drawn up with a notary she had been using for 30 years, using forged authorization she had obtained by exploiting the fact that she was listed as an honorary advisory board member of Verilog, a title my husband had suggested as a goodwill gesture 2 years ago, a title I had agreed to because I thought it was harmless. It was the only business mistake I have ever made. She had used that title to request an internal document from our company administrator, a junior employee who hadn't verified the request chain. She had obtained a copy of our standard license transfer template. She had filled it in. She had signed my name. The room was still celebrating when she found me. She materialized at my shoulder with her champagne and her cream blazer and steered me with 2 fingers on my elbow toward the hallway beside the kitchen, away from the guests and the noise. She pulled the door mostly shut. She looked at me with the expression I had come to think of as her management face, composed, certain, faintly pitying. She said she hoped I wasn't going to make this into something. I asked what she meant. She said she meant that she hoped I understood the spirit in which this was done. She said that I had abundance, that I had built something successful, and she admired that. She truly did, but that my husband's brother was struggling, and family took care of family. She said I had more than enough. She said the license transfer was a formality, that my company would still operate, that I would barely notice the equity shift. She said she had consulted with her attorney and everything was in order. I asked whose attorney. She said that wasn't relevant. I told her she had forged my signature on a legal document. She didn't blink. She said she had signed on behalf of the advisory board, which she was a member of, and that the language was ambiguous enough that any reasonable reading would support her interpretation. She said this the way someone says it when they have rehearsed it, when they have decided in advance that they are right. Then she leaned forward slightly and told me that my husband had known about this. Not the details, she said, but the general shape of it. He had not objected. I filed that away. She said she needed me to go back into that dining room and shake my brother-in-law's hand and welcome him as a partner. She said if I created a scene, if I embarrassed the family in front of their guests, she would ensure that my husband's family, all of them, the cousins, the aunts, the business connections, the social network she had been tending for 40 years would know that I had stood in the way of helping someone who needed it. She said I would be the villain of every story she told from now until she died. She offered me her pen. I looked at the pen. I looked at her. There is a specific kind of grief that comes from realizing someone never saw you at all. Not as a threat, not as a rival, not even as an obstacle. She had looked at everything I built and seen a communal resource that simply hadn't been distributed yet. In her architecture of the world, my success existed to be managed by people who understood family. I was a mechanism. I was a wallet with a personality that occasionally needed to be handled. I took the pen. I said, "You're right. He needs this opportunity." Her shoulders dropped a fraction. The tension behind her eyes dissolved. She thought she had won the same way she had always won, by framing compliance as the mature choice and resistance as selfishness. She didn't know that I had spent the previous 40 minutes in the bathroom sending 2 text messages, one to my attorney, one to a contact at the FTC, whose number I had saved under a coffee order in my phone. We walked back into the dining room. My brother-in-law was at the head of the table now, leaning over the document, a glass of bourbon in one hand and my company's future in the other. His girlfriend was taking pictures. Guests were talking over each other. My mother-in-law touched my arm and nodded toward the table, and I walked toward him with the warmth of someone who has already calculated every variable in the room. I said his name. I said congratulations. I said this was a big moment and he should make sure he understood exactly what he was signing, because documents like this carry weight. I said it with the tone of a friendly sister-in-law offering sensible advice. He looked at me the way he always looked at me, a little wary, a little dismissive, the look of someone who knew I was smarter than him and had decided that meant I was unfun. He said he'd had his guy look it over. He said it was clean. I said great. I said sign it and we'll celebrate. He pressed the pen to the paper. I watched him write his name across the transfer acceptance line. I watched him initial the equity clause. I watched him date it. He set the pen down and picked up his bourbon. I pulled my phone from my jacket pocket and placed it face up on the table in front of him. The room was still noisy, still warm, still full of the sounds of a family celebrating itself. I let 3 seconds pass. Then I said, I just want to make sure everyone understands what was just signed. My mother-in-law said my name. Sharp. A warning. I said, Verilog Solutions is currently operating as a designated technical cooperating entity with the Federal Trade Commission under a voluntary assistance framework. That means the company's core assets, including the licensing rights and the equity stake just transferred, are under a federal administrative hold. They cannot be legally transferred, received, or encumbered by any third party without prior written clearance from the supervising division. The room didn't go quiet all at once. It went quiet in a wave, starting with the people closest to us, spreading outward as people registered the shift in the air. My brother-in-law set down his bourbon. I tapped my phone screen. A name appeared in my recent calls. I turned the speaker on. The voice that came through was unhurried and precise. He confirmed his name and title. He confirmed that he was calling in his official capacity. He confirmed that Verilog Solutions was operating under the framework I had described. He confirmed that any transfer of the company's protected assets conducted without prior authorization was a violation of the administrative hold and potentially constituted obstruction of an active federal inquiry. He said, We do have the signed document on record from this evening. Our office will be in touch. My brother-in-law stood up so fast his chair hit the sideboard behind him. He said this was insane. He said I had set him up. He said he hadn't known. He looked at my mother-in-law and said she had told him this was clean. She had said it was handled. She had said there was nothing to worry about. My mother-in-law had gone the color of the ivory tablecloth. I said, The administrative hold is one issue. The other issue is the reason the hold exists. I opened a document on my phone and held it so the people nearest to me could see. I didn't wave it around. I didn't perform. I said that 18 months ago I had run a background check on my brother-in-law after he approached me about a business partnership. What I found was that his previous company, the real estate wholesaling operation, had been the subject of a complaint filed with the FTC's Consumer Protection Division by 4 different individuals who alleged that he had used proprietary software belonging to a former partner without authorization. The case had been quietly investigated. He had not been charged yet. He had not been cleared either. I said. When I was approached about becoming a cooperating entity, the asset he just accepted transfer of was specifically identified as relevant to the inquiry because our licensing architecture overlaps with the technology in dispute. By accepting this transfer, he didn't receive a business gift. He received evidence. His girlfriend stepped back from him. Physically, one clear step backward. My mother-in-law said my name again, but this time it wasn't a warning. It was something else. Something smaller. I looked at her and I said, "You used a forged instrument to transfer protected assets to someone under federal scrutiny, using an advisory board position that was given to you as a courtesy. That's fraud. And it is obstruction. And you did it in front of 40 witnesses." She said she hadn't known. She said she hadn't known about any of it. About the FTC. About the hold. About any of it. She said she had only been trying to help her son. I said, "I know." I said, "That's the part that should keep you up at night. You didn't need malicious intent. You needed to pick up a phone and ask me one question before you signed my name to a document. One question. You never considered it because you never considered me." The room had the specific silence of people who are trying to be invisible. Phones had appeared in hands. The couple nearest the door had angled their chairs slightly toward the exit. My husband was looking at me now. He had been looking at me since I placed my phone on the table. His expression was the expression of a man watching something he thought he knew become something else entirely. I had no particular feeling about it. We had had that conversation before. The conversation about his mother and his brother, and the space he allowed them to occupy in our lives. We had had it many times. I had stopped expecting it to go differently. I picked up my phone. I put it in my pocket. I straightened my jacket. My mother-in-law grabbed my wrist. She said, "Fix this." She said, "Call them back and tell them it was a misunderstanding." She said I was destroying her family, and she would never forgive me. I said, "Your family has been treating my work like a resource they were owed for 7 years. I let it go every time because I wanted to preserve something. Tonight you forged my name on a federal document and handed my company to a man who stole from his last partner. There's nothing left for me to preserve." I removed her hand from my wrist. I said goodbye to the room in general. Not to anyone specifically. Not as a performance. Just as a fact. I walked to the front door. I got my coat from the closet. I heard my mother-in-law's voice rising behind me, shifting from plea to accusation the way it always did when she stopped getting what she wanted. I heard my brother-in-law saying he needed to call someone. I heard the girlfriend's voice, very low, saying she thought she should go home. I walked out. My car was at the end of the driveway. The air outside was cold and still, and it tasted like nothing that had happened in the last 40 minutes. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment without starting the engine. I want to tell you that I felt triumphant, that it was clean and satisfying in the way a movie is clean and satisfying. It wasn't. What I felt was tired in a very specific way, the tiredness of someone who has carried a weight carefully for a long time and has finally put it down. Not the triumph of winning. The relief of being done. My phone had 14 messages by the time I reached the end of the street. I drove without looking at it. There is something nobody tells you about being consistently underestimated by people who love you, or who are supposed to love you. It doesn't make you hard. It makes you precise. Every time my mother-in-law looked through me at a dinner table, every time she summarized my career in the vague language she used for things she didn't value, every time she redirected a conversation about my work toward a conversation about her son's next venture, all of it became data. All of it was information about what she was willing to do and how far she would go and what she believed she was entitled to take. I had not set a trap. I want to be clear about that. I had not spent months positioning Verilok as a cooperating entity in order to catch my mother-in-law. The cooperation with the FTC was real, and predated this evening by over a year. The hold on the company's assets was real. The investigation into my brother-in-law's prior conduct was real, and had nothing to do with me beyond the background check that had caused me to flag it when I was first contacted by the FTC's office. What I had done was this. I had not warned them. I had not called my mother-in-law 6 months ago and said, "You should know my company is involved in something sensitive." I had not told my husband in a way that would travel back to her. I had protected the integrity of an active federal inquiry, the way I was legally obligated to do. If she had asked me, I would have told her what I could. She had never asked. She had taken instead. That distinction matters to her, I think. It might matter to you too. I've thought about it enough. The conclusion I keep returning to is that warning someone away from their own bad choices is a kindness you extend when you trust that the warning will be received. I had 7 years of evidence about how this particular person received information that complicated what she wanted to believe. I had made my peace with that. My attorney called me at 10:40 that night and walked me through the next steps. My FTC contact sent an email confirming that the evening's events had been properly documented and that the administrative record was intact. My brother-in-law would be receiving a formal inquiry notice within 10 business days. The nature of any further action would depend on what that inquiry produced. My mother-in-law had not been charged with anything as of that night. What she had done was serious enough to require a conversation with investigators, and whether that conversation led anywhere further depended on how forthcoming she chose to be. I was not involved in that determination. I had no ability to influence it and, in that moment, no particular desire to. What I did that night, after I hung up with my attorney, was drive to the office. Not because I needed to, because it was mine. Because I had built it from a second-hand desk and a $12,000 personal loan and 4 years of 18-hour days, and it was the place in the world that had never asked me to be smaller than I was. I sat at my desk for a long time without working. I looked at the framed copy of Verilog's first enterprise contract on the wall. I thought about the version of myself who had signed that contract 27 years old, completely terrified, pretending she wasn't. I thought about all the dinners she had attended after that. All the times she had let a small wound go unbandaged because the cost of addressing it seemed higher than the cost of carrying it. I thought about the moment at the table when my mother-in-law's hand had closed around my wrist. I thought about removing it. Something had shifted when I did that. Not dramatically. Not the way it shifts in movies. But something had closed. A door I had been holding open for 7 years, out of a hope that was increasingly indistinguishable from habit. She was not a monster. I want to say that plainly because I think it matters. She was a woman who loved her sons with a completeness that left no room to question whether that love was fair. She had decided very early that the way to love them was to clear every obstacle and fill every gap, and she had done that so consistently that she had lost the ability to perceive the obstacles she created for other people in the process. She had taken my company's assets the same way she had taken my seat at the table for 7 years, not with cruelty, but with the serene confidence of someone who had never been asked to account for what they consumed. That kind of person doesn't change when you hand them a consequence. They reclassify the consequence as an injustice. I had no illusion about what she was telling her remaining guests after I walked out of that house. I had no illusion about the story she was already constructing. The one where I was cold and calculating, and had engineered her son's downfall. She wasn't entirely wrong. I am precise. I do not make decisions without data. I had known for 18 months that if she ever reached for my company, the reach would close around something she wasn't expecting. I had not warned her. Whether that makes me cold depends on what you think I owed her after 7 years of being managed and redirected and thanked for my patience. I don't lie awake over that question anymore. My husband came to the office at midnight. He knocked, which he had never done before. He sat down across from me, and he said he hadn't known. He said he had known she was planning something but hadn't known it had gone this far, and he should have pushed harder when he had the sense something was wrong, and he was sorry. I believed him. That's the complicated part of this story. I believed him. He was not a bad person. He was a person who had been raised by someone who was very good at making the path of least resistance feel like loyalty. He had spent his whole life choosing her version of the story, because the alternative required a kind of confrontation his character hadn't been built for. I told him I believed him. I told him it wasn't enough. I told him I needed him to understand that the way he had watched me be managed and redirected for 7 years, the way he had communicated his mother's plans to her, without ever communicating mine to me, all of it had made tonight possible. Not by malice, by omission. By a pattern of choosing her comfort over my standing that had been so consistent I had stopped expecting it to change. He asked what I needed. I told him I needed him to make a decision. Not about his mother, not about the legal situation, not about the family narrative. A decision about me, about whether I was the person he was building a life with or the person his life was built around. He didn't answer that night. I drove home alone. I don't know yet what he'll decide. That part is still in motion, still raw enough that I'm not ready to narrate it like it's finished. What I know is that I went to sleep that night in the quiet of a house that felt different than it had the morning before, not emptier, exactly, but more honest, like a room with the furniture rearranged to reflect where people actually sat instead of where they were supposed to sit. I know that I walked out of that dinner without performing a single emotion I didn't feel. I didn't cry in front of them. I didn't rage. I didn't beg for acknowledgement from people who had already decided I was a supporting character in their story. I also know this. The software is mine. The company is mine. The 4 years of 18-hour days. The first enterprise client I won by presenting alone in a conference room where I was the only woman. The 43 employees whose health insurance runs through payroll I built. All of it is mine. No one gave it to me. No one cleared the path. I built it in the margins of a life where I was consistently told to take up less space. There is only one thing I want to leave you with. And it's this. The most dangerous person in any room is not the one who is loudest about what they deserve. It's the one who has been quietly keeping the books. I had been keeping the books for 7 years. Every dismissal, every redirect, every dinner, where my name wasn't worth saying. Every time she reached for something I had built as though building it had only ever been a technicality. Ledgers don't lie. And when you hand someone a pen to sign their name on a document they don't understand, inside a trap they never saw, the balance finally clears. I wasn't waiting for her to see me. I was waiting for her to reach far enough. She did.